Okay, so hi everybody. Welcome to the first Syllabus for Peace reading group in conjunction with Jamil Kazoko's American Chameleon, The Living Installments. This reading group is for Miriam Caba's New York Times piece, Yes, We Mean Literally Abolish the Police. So before I jump into things, just some housekeeping. Firstly, the reading groups are organized by city, Portland and Philadelphia. So if you haven't yet, please rename yourself. You can do so with the three dots in the top right corner of your box. And just at the end of your name or in the front of your name, add PHL or PDX. And then I believe everybody here is from Portland or Philly. If not, then when we do breakout groups, you'll just chill with me. Secondly, we will be recording the first 30 minutes of this session. The breakout groups and final report backs won't be, so just the first 30 minutes. And then finally, just some Zoom etiquette. If you aren't speaking, please keep yourself muted. So with that being said, I can jump right into it. My name is Malkia Okech. I'm an associate producer for Black Spatial Relics, which is a residency, an artist residency for freedom and justice. I'm also a digital producer for a local agency, Mighty Engine. I identify in my artistic practice as an art worker, a community archaeologist, an activist, and a futurist. I know it's a mouthful, but I see being an archaeologist and a futurist as in one person. I was trained in archaeology and cultural anthropology in college, but I've since started to sort of reclaim that terminology to start thinking about broader questions and issues in community organizing more deeply, more metaphorically, and also look at material conditions and material culture through observation, documentation, and community processes. So right now I'm working on an oral history in West Philadelphia about abolitionist Stephen Smith. And currently I'm developing a project called Memory Studio, where I'm building experiments on cultural heritage, on artifact activation. So, seeing artifacts as living and continual things, not just, relics of the past. So sort of a play on abolishing the modern museum institution. But going into my activism, I consider myself a decolonial abolitionist. Abolitionist as much as I am a futurist, believing there will be a day without our current oppressive structures, and this will be necessitated by struggle and revolution. And this is informed both by the past through archive and also the present as these practices are coming back into play by activists today. And one group I do identify with is Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement, and we essentially operate under the assumption that slavery was never fully abolished, and it is through the structures of prisons and police that they continue to thrive, to maintain our capitalist structure. So I'm going to share a slideshow and quickly get into what we'll be talking about today. Okay. Great. So again, this is a reading group for Miriam Caba's New York Times piece. Yes, we mean literally abolish the police. Miriam Caba is an organizer, educator, and she founded Project NIA, which works on ending youth incarceration. She's overall a wonderful spokesperson for abolition. So I'm going to assume you at least skimmed Caba's piece to get a sense of her arguments, some of which I will rehash here, but my focus is not to teach abolition per se, rather to breach this conversation by having you reflect on community, safety, and liberation. And also to think about how you could apply this framework or analysis to the material conditions of your own community or neighborhood. So my goal isn't to convince you to become an abolitionist, rather to start thinking, dreaming, and imagining in a way you might not be already, or if you are, grounding yourself in what abolition really means to you more deeply. So before I jump into what is abolition and Caba's piece more deeply, I wanted to start with a sort of micro meditation, if you will. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about the following prompt. It's from Relax, Relate, Release, Meditations for the Mind, Soul, Spirit, and Revolution by Jenna Smith. It's a series of really cool reflections and meditations using clips of different speeches and protests and things like that. And it's really designed to ground yourself in these concepts and think more deeply about them and how you can apply them to your life. So yeah, let's take these 30 seconds together. I'm going to start a timer. And the questions are, when you close your eyes and think about the world you want for yourself and those you hold dear, what do you see? So feel free to close your eyes or not, and just really feel through these questions. When you imagine this ideal world, who is there? Who isn't? Who have you included and who have you left out? Why? Great. So that was just to start thinking about how you connect to liberation and freedom and whether or not abolition facilitates that. I think it's important, especially in the context of the syllabus for peace, to think about what that peaceful world looks like for you, as idealist as it might be, without these oppressive structures and things. It's okay. I think that grounding ourselves in these reflections helps us think about the practical steps to getting there. And while I will not be detailing entirely what those steps might be for you, I hope that this at least sort of facilitates what you might start, marinating with, so to speak. So with this in mind, maybe you'll, write down what you're thinking about or keep it in the back of your brain and bring it back to the breakout groups. I have another question for you all. And for this one, I would love it if you can put your responses in the chat if you feel so compelled to. So this question is, what comes to mind when you hear abolition? So, it could be thoughts, feelings, ideas, and there's no right or wrong answer. Just abolition, what comes to mind for you? I'm gonna leave a few seconds for everybody to sort of think on that. Interesting, yep. An end, elimination, a beginning, joy. Freedom from those currently in bondage. Mm-hmm. Most people don't subscribe to that viewpoint. That's valid as well. I hope that, through this, we can all challenge ourselves to try to think from that framework, but I'm not expecting anybody to understand it or believe in it from today, from right now. Freedom, breaking through. Great. I really love these responses. You can continue to put your words in the chat for, everybody to sort of reflect on as they come through. I'm going to move on to the rest of the presentation, but hold on to this and maybe revisit it when you do your breakout groups. Great. So getting into Miriam Caba's piece, the past, present, and future of abolition is a massive topic. So I'll only really have time here to skim the surface. And I want to give everybody an opportunity to challenge your assumptions or validate your position in the world today, whether or not you had the term abolition to describe that. And as I mentioned before, in the context of the syllabus for peace, does abolition look like peace to you? Especially thinking about how you reflected before on what a peaceful world might look like for you. So before I jump into a larger overview of Caba's piece, I want to highlight the passage that we'll be focusing on. And it says, "People like me who want to abolish prisons and police, however, have a vision of a different society, built on cooperation instead of individualism, on mutual aid instead of self-preservation. What would the country look like if it had billions of extra dollars to spend on housing, food, and education for all? This change in society wouldn't happen immediately, but the protests show that many people are ready to embrace a different vision of safety and justice." So, with that said, what is abolition? Caba's piece doesn't really give, a full definition for it, but I understand abolition as it was the deconstruction of slavery and now the deconstruction of the carceral state, which derives from slavery. And carceral state here meaning police and prisons. And I've attached this definition here in this slideshow. It says PIC, or Prison Industrial Complex, abolition is a political vision with the goal of eliminating prisons, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. Abolition isn't just about getting rid of cages. It means developing practical strategies for taking small steps that move us toward making our dreams real and that lead us all to believe that things really could be different. Abolition is both a practical organizing tool and a long-term goal. So just to review some of the points from Miriam Caba's piece, she gives us a brief history of policing, emerging as slave patrols in the 1700s and 1800s in the South, and then in the mid-1800s in the North, police stations were developed as a way to combat labor strikes. And one thing that I would love to bring up here that sort of connects this, there's a piece, so the one connection between Portland and Philadelphia is that we have both had experience with Police Commissioner Daniel Outlaw. So last year, Daniel Outlaw came from Portland to Philadelphia. Some Portlanders warned us, be careful, she's been interesting here. And she's proven to be interesting in Philadelphia as well. So I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of who she, but in June, especially the way police handled protesting and stuff like that, it wasn't nice. So I'll just leave it at that in terms of her. But I wanted to pull out a quote from her from, I think it was her third day on the job here. Somebody interviewed her. And the quote says, "We have to recognize in law enforcement, whether it's here or anywhere, that community feels a certain way for a reason. Historically, when you look at why police began in the first place, it wasn't for a positive reason. It wasn't to protect all of the community. It wasn't about equity and to ensure community safety at all. We began as slave patrols, to be quite frank." And this was Police Commissioner Daniel Outlaw. And when I read this, I was shocked, and I was like, wow, so this head of the police state understands the origins of the police state and has decided to uphold it instead of challenge it. That is very interesting. And from that, I just wanted to talk briefly about this connection between past to present to future of abolition. The past of abolition should inform our current practice. I mentioned revolutionary abolitionist movement, how the pinnacle of that organization is that slavery didn't fully end. We have that evidence in things like the 13th Amendment, that, you know, men are free other than when they're imprisoned. But also that we still have the job to burn down the American plantation, and we need to reestablish an underground railroad in order to sort of facilitate the changes we're looking for. If you go to RAM's website or find their book, it's all online, easily accessible. And when I heard that analysis of police and prisons, I was like, that makes a ton of sense to me, because we have an archive there to prove it. And I'm currently working on, I mentioned in oral history, on Stephen Smith, specifically Stephen Smith apartments in West Philly, with some community elders and folks who have lived there, who have lived around there. And basically a quick history of that is Stephen Smith was enslaved. He was able to buy his freedom. And then when he went to Philadelphia, and he was able to accumulate some wealth. And with that wealth, he established Stephen Smith Townhomes as an elderly facility. And it was in that he was considering, okay, where do freed elderly folks go? And my reason for bringing this up is part of abolition is looking at what's past the current oppressive system. And we need to restudy Reconstruction to see what, you know, Black self-determination projects look like, and how, you know, how we can either replicate that in our own lives now, or use that as inspiration to push forward when we're thinking about alternatives to policing prisons. And I don't know if you can see this, there's a lot of words there, but the reason I wanted to show it is that police and prison reform is often seen as the more practical alternative to abolition, but there are actionable steps. There are, you know, practices and policy initiatives that abolitionists like Miriam Caba are taking to tackle the police system. Caba mentions that not an easy fix, but something that could be done, and some, you know, 5 to 10 year goal could be cutting police forces in half, could be cutting police budgets in half. And that would help with some of what she mentioned, which is essentially, you know, education, housing, food, health, and, you know, sort of things like how we're living now in COVID-19. Maybe people would have access to more testing if, you know, funds were diverted from, you know, bajillion dollars going to police and actually going into communities. So I think one of the ways to think about abolition, if, you know, you're uncomfortable with the idea of the police not being around, well, if they weren't around and that money went somewhere else, then somebody else would be benefiting from it. And some of the material conditions that necessitate, you know, crime, punishment, things like that, it would look completely different. So that was why I wanted to bring that up. And as I mentioned, the rationale for abolition is looking at the foundation. It's very negative. And also this preconceived notion that police maintain law and order or combat crime. They do that, I guess, if you look on the surface level, but most of what they do is protect property. And a couple of statistics that Caba refers to in her piece include New Orleans, Montgomery County, Maryland, and Sacramento, showing that officers spent about 4% of their time on violent crimes, the rest going to petty crimes. And I looked at Philly and Portland. In Philly, 27% of arrests are violent crimes, and 31% of arrests in Portland are violent crimes. And this is for 2020. That's obviously a lot larger than 4%, but it's still less than 50% and shows that resources are not committed to the problems that we think they are. So, coming back to the excerpt I started with, this is what I want to focus the rest of our conversation on, embracing this different vision, because, you know, police and prisons have sort of ruled our lives up until this point. And it's hard to imagine an alternative. And to address an earlier comment, a lot of people don't ascribe to it because we've been conditioned to believe that the only vision of safety and justice is by police officers and by our prison system. And this idea has ruled our entire lives for generations. And it can be a lot to wrap your mind around. This is both true for the United States and also other countries. I study abolition in Africa as well, particularly East Africa. But if you look at former French and British colonies in West and East Africa, their current police systems also replicate their previous colonial systems. And if you look at, for example, Nairobi, Kenya in June, they joined the United States in solidarity to talk about police brutality there. And to think about this alternative vision, I'll talk a little bit about some examples of these alternative visions. One thing I draw inspiration from is maroonage. Maroonage is the practice of self-sustaining societies that came out of enslavement. Examples include in Jamaica, in Louisiana, particularly hard to reach places like swamps and mountains. There's also other post-slavery settlements, like Fannie Lou Hamer's Freedom Farms. Also, Zora Neale Hurston's hometown, the name is escaping me right now, but was also a Black settlement project. And there's been some recent headlines too, including I think it was 19 Black families acquired 90 acres of land in Toomsboro, Georgia. And another contemporary example is Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi. Now, these are examples of Black self-sustaining communities that are one way you can look at abolition as being self-determination and not relying on white supremacist capitalist systems to live your life. Another example being Zapatistas in Mexico, having rotating council systems of governance, having a justice system moderated by council members and communal assemblies elected, looking at restorative justice instead of punitive. Those are just some examples, and like I said, abolition doesn't have to look like this, but the idea of being self-sustaining without moderation or oversight by contemporary slaveholders and overseers, what does that look like? So hopefully this information is only the surface of what I'm trying to get at. But I hope that these examples and this information can at least get you started in thinking about a radical imagination, or a radical reflection on how you operate in your community. So yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing. I apologize, I have not been keeping up with the chat. I'll get to questions later. So yeah, going back to Caba's excerpt, let's explore this vision. I want all of us to explore our connections or fears to the carceral state, how this way of living and being affects our lives, and what we can do to make it better. Or as Caba says, embrace a different vision. Like I said, the end goal isn't to convince you to be an abolitionist, but rather start tinkering with this framework in your own life. So seeing as I've gone a little overtime for this beginning section, I had a few other group questions, but maybe we can return to those after the breakout groups. So yeah. Do I have time for any questions before breakout groups, or should we just go right into that because of time?
I wonder if we want to move to breakout groups, maybe those questions can come up in small groups and then continue to percolate in the big groups afterwards. But thank you so much, Malkia. That was really wonderful, and so many exciting things for us to continue to talk about. For everybody who's joined us, because I know some people filtered in after we got started, I just want to say once again, welcome. I'm Katie Jammers. I'm one of the artistic producers here at Fringe, and we are thrilled that you joined us for the reading group today. This is presented in collaboration with PICA, and Roya is here with us from Portland and that institution today. These reading groups are created in conjunction with American Chameleon, The Living Installments, which is a performative practice and pedagogy that Jamil Olawale Kosoko is presenting in both the TBA Festival in Portland and the Philly Fringe Festival here in Philadelphia. So thanks for being part of this. Next, we're going to move into small groups that are city specific. So if you have not already renamed yourself to include the acronym of your city, either PHL for Philadelphia or PDX for Portland. If you can take a moment to do that now, that'd be awesome. To rename yourself, if you click in your little individual tile, you'll see on the upper right-hand side 3 dots. If you click that, you'll see a drop-down menu, and within that is the word rename. You can then go ahead and rename yourself. Malkia is joined by 2 incredible co-facilitators today, Lisa Jarrett from Portland and Amalia Dache from Philadelphia. They will be working in their respective communities for these small breakout conversations, which will probably be around 25 to 30 minutes. And then we'll have an opportunity to come back as a larger group, as we are now, to share some thoughts from those and to have more conversation between the 2 cities. So Swift, who is our great technician here from Philly, who's working in the Zoom room with us today, will go ahead and sort people into breakout rooms now based on how you've identified your city and your name. And if you have any challenges in the breakout room, know that your facilitator can help you, and that we ask each breakout room just take a moment to get settled when they arrive and introduce themselves, make sure you're in the right room, and go from there. But thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you soon.